book, I do discuss the underworld and what it means to be in the underworld, to go to the underworld, and how to do the transformation you need to do to get out of the underworld. So for me, I have two specific events that I'll talk about right now that are both in the book. And one was an experience where I did DMT, which is an ayahuasca, synthetic ayahuasca, and I did a very powerful form of it. And I previously always had, I would say, a fear of death. And after that experience, well, first of all, during the experience, I went to hell. I went to a place with no love, no light, demons, skeletal figures. And I was doing it with a friend, and I was grabbed onto him and held onto him that whole time because it was the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And when I finally came out, oh, the relief. But over the next few years, as I integrated the experience, I realized that my fear of death had gone, because I had already gone someplace worse than death. And so it was, I do write about this. There's a story about this in the book about how those kinds of experiences can sometimes help us transform or release something that's been a block. So that's one type of, I would call that a acute dark night of the soul experience, where the transformative piece happens over time afterwards. The other experience I had that was dark night of the soul that I do talk about in the book, and I think there's probably actually more than these two, but these are the two that are coming up, is I was in a relationship when I was much younger with someone who had huge addiction problems. And I was not a strong enough person to get myself out of that relationship. So what happened is I went down into the depths with that relationship. If you are in a relationship with someone who is basically killing themselves with drugs and you aren't strong enough to leave, that is a dark night of the soul experience. And I had to rebuild myself, which I used a number of things, therapy, books, 12-step programs, to find the strength to be able to eventually leave that relationship and make better choices. That relationship came directly out of what had happened to me as a child and why I wasn't strong. But that is another example of a dark night of the soul, though a much longer one. That was a 4.5-year relationship before it ended, where I had to completely restructure who I was in order to live in a world that I could be competent in terms of love and relationships. So it's just another example of a dark night of the soul and transformation. Another type of transformation is when we work with invocation, bringing in spirit, bringing in guides, using words to shift energy. And that is yet another kind of shifting energy with the power of intention and words. And that is something else that I talk about in the book. So those are three things that come to mind right now about dark night of the soul and transformation. So the reason I did the DMT was I thought it would be transformative, but I didn't think it would be a hell experience. I thought a lot of people doing it were having these wonderful, amazing, heart-opening, light-filled experiences. That was what I thought would happen, and that is not what happened. I had a very, very Plutonian depth experience. My guide was a shamanic practitioner who I knew, and I asked him if he would do it with me, and he agreed. So I live in a very special, beautiful place, northwestern Washington State, in the San Juan Islands, and I live on Orcas Island. And Orcas Island has a lot of witches because, well, I think there's an energetic vortex here, but beyond that, it is a place where people honor the trees, honor the water, honor the sky, have reverence for our earth. And there's a lot of healers here, a lot of really interesting, creative, smart people. And it's just a great place to be a witch because there's a lot of people here who are able to say, I am a witch, and they aren't hiding it. And to be in that environment is just, it's just so much better than having to hide who you are, hide your skills, hide how you interact with the universe. And so I consider myself very, very fortunate. So before I moved to Orcas Island, I had no idea the environment I was moving into. I just knew it was beautiful and I wanted to move there. And when I got here, over time, I met all these people with these witchy skills of different kinds who identified as witches. And that was before I identified as a witch. So it helped me to be in this environment where it's okay to say, well, I have witchy qualities. I can even say I'm a witch. That was very helpful to be in a supportive environment for that. Another thing that's really interesting here is, and they do this in many places, but we have a beautiful lake called Cascade Lake, and sometimes they do it at Crescent Beach, but we have what's called a witch's paddle, and all these, usually women, get in there, put their witches hats on or whatever, and get their paddle boards and do a group paddle around, I think it's usually a Halloween or close to Halloween. And anyway, really fun and really cool. So many of us are raised in what I would call a human-centric world. If we're raised in the suburbs or the city, this is especially true, though it can also be true in the country. And that means, if you think back to when everyone thought that the sun and moon and all the planets in the universe revolved around the Earth, and then we later found out, no, the Earth is not the center of the universe. If you just take that as an analogy, humans are not, it's not all about the humans. It's about the whole, everything, other dimensions, the stars, the planets, the life force, the divas, the trees, the everything, and the animals. And the world I live in is not human-centric. Humans are they're a piece of the world. They're part of the weave of the world and the universe. But it's not like they're at the center and everything around revolves. We think we're at the center and everything revolves around us. It should be clear, looking at what happens in the world, that is actually not the case. The world is so much bigger than just humans. And when you start opening up to this idea that there's other beings, other dimensions, it's freeing. Love's Cauldron helps the reader appreciate that we're more than just the human-centric world, and also helps us travel through the emotional journey of being in a world that involves emotional healing and transformation, but it's not completely centered around the human. So trauma, especially early trauma, I would say let's talk about early trauma, early environments where we're not attuned to, early environments where we're not seen or held or perceived for who we truly are. If we are sensitive, or if we don't feel safe, if we are a sensitive being and we have the proclivity for attuning to other things, and we grow up in that kind of environment, we will sort of develop antenna because we want to be safe. So our antenna come out so we can sort of see what's going on and what do we have to do to make ourselves safe. That is part of developing, for many people, not everyone, for many people, of developing the ability to tune in to other things, other voices, clairaudient, clairvoyant, whatever, other dimensions, because we are not, like, we don't feel home in our place. We don't feel home in our home. We don't feel safe in our homes. We realize that we have to be hypervigilant, and hypervigilant often causes us to develop qualities where we can attune to more than the less sensitive, non-traumatized person can attune to. Maybe not always, but certainly in many cases. I share some of my early experiences that caused me to feel unsafe, unseen, and to give the reader a sense of, what the emotional life is and how we start tuning into other things. Because we're all on emotional journeys, whether we know it or not, and we all have some ability to tune into more than the five senses. So in Love's Cauldron, I do talk a lot about ways of perceiving beyond the flatlands, as I call it, 1 + 2 = 3. I talk about some tarot readings and how I used a tarot reading to communicate with my mother, who had passed on. She communicated to me through that tarot reading. So I talk about a lot of things that have to do with ways of opening up the intuition to other, like portals, to other dimensions, other people who passed on, other knowledge. So growing up, and again, I grew up in a difficult, what was it for me, a difficult childhood. Not everyone might agree, but for me it was very difficult. And, I used books and animals. Animals I found love with, and books opened me up to other worlds to survive. And one of the things I read when I was, a teenager is I read all the Seth Speak books, which are channeled. I read astrology. I read, at some point, I Ching, although that might have been a little later. I was interested in everything that was beyond this limited world. And so I just spent a lot of time exploring other voices. What are the channeled beings saying? What does that mean? How does it impact me? And that was the beginning. Now, at that point in time, I didn't know what that meant. Why do I like all that? I don't know. But later, when I started using the pendulum, well, first I learned tarot way before that. I learned tarot. I started working with a tarot when I was 25, and later I started using a pendulum, which is where I really learned how to tune into other voices and other information. But I didn't want people to know I used a pendulum because I didn't want to be made fun of. I didn't want to be laughed at. I didn't want to be heckled. And part of claiming your power is, hopefully you're safe enough to do this. If you're not, don't do it. But saying who you are and how you engage with the world and the universe. And for me, using the pendulum is one of the ways, using the tarot cards, that kind of thing. So how do people find out that they're witches? Or, male witches, same thing, non-binary witches. I think different people have different paths, and I only know my path. But I think as you are engaging in your life and growing older, some people may start knowing things, like you're about to pick up the phone and you know who's on that call, that kind of thing, which my mother was able to do, even though she had no idea she had witchy abilities. But so it's, for most people, I think it's just a process of engaging in the world and going, oh, I knew that, or oh, I felt that, or oh, I got that vision, or oh, that kind of thing. And eventually you go, oh, I've got a skill set that I would call witchy. Another example could be, my husband and I, and he does not identify as a witch, and he's not nearly as sensitive as I am. And so he can sort of go into battle and not be perturbed. I would be in torture. But we have moments where we both think the same thing at the same time, where the brains, the minds are connected, and that is always a interesting experience. Another thing I talk about in Love's Cauldron is dream work. And I do have a story about this in Love's Cauldron. Dream work can open you up to other possibilities. Again, this is transformative. I did a dream work session with one of my old therapists, again, years ago, and I had a trauma around a specific horse I had, a pony. And in that piece of dream work, we changed what happened. I entered into the dream, she guided me, and we organically moved through it until the ending. At the end of that piece of dream work, my horse, Specs, was in a safe place. Because I had a dream about him where he was drowning, and I woke up straight out of bed and I knew he had just died. And that had haunted me because I loved this horse and I couldn't protect him. I ended up giving him away to a family because they said they would keep him, and hopefully they did. I don't know. I lost track of things as I moved around and I was young. But doing that piece of dream work left me with a space of, oh, there is a definite possibility that he had a happy life, and that this dream I had of him dying, he may have died, but that doesn't mean he had a horrible death. And it was very healing and very transformative. So this is a proof copy, and the book should be out any day now. I'm going to try to get it into our local bookstore, Darville's on Orcas Island. Hopefully they'll take it. And it's going to be at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and we will be doing an audio version, but that's not done yet, but it will be paperback and it will be Kindle. It is long, and there will be a book 2 because it was so long we had to split it into 2 books. So this is book 1, and I'm really excited, and I hope you are too.